Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to do an album review today. We're going to check out a full album, stopping after every track or two to discuss what's going on in both the tracks that we heard and how they relate to the tracks around them in the album. Today we're looking at a band called Der Weg Einer Freiheit. It translates to The Path of Freedom. We're looking at their, I think, Noktvrn album. It does have a V where the U should be, but I'm pretty sure that's just true black metal right there. Um, a lot of this is in German, so I'm probably not going to be attempting to pronounce all the titles. This was like my 11th take to pronounce the band. I have what are the bloopers, where I mispronounced it. I'm still not 100% happy with my pronunciation either. The final word, there's like an H sound between the F and the R, and I can't do it. Plus, I want to roll my R's, and that messes me up every time too. So anyways, the track titles will be over there as usual, and it's only 7 tracks long, I think, and our opening track is a 1-minute intro. So we're probably just going to pause after every track. They're all lengthy, and it's only a 47-minute album as well. So I think it's going to be a bit on the shorter end, probably about 3 hours and 15 minutes, I'd say, for the video length. Let's dive into this and see what they're bringing to the table with our intro track and then the second track after that. Yeah, very cool right off the start. I love that chord right there. Really smooth transition into this next track, and more interestingly is that it's still an appropriate sounds. A lot of reverb over here. Stands out quite a bit from all the other straight played instruments. It's kind of hazy, dreary. Small tempo increases. Maybe that was just volume. It felt like we were speeding up a hair. And after this section's where we hit the black metal, isn't it? Oh, maybe not. I was close enough. I was close enough. Chord right there. You know what's really weird? The notes the guitars are playing remind me of My Chemical Romance, their second album. I don't know why. I'm getting like a Helena Ghost of You vibe from the melodies. Well, I suppose just to say from the chord progression. I love what the bass is contributing as well. The strings are helping to add some levity to it. Interesting. Using the white noise, the static as an element outside of the guitars. All right. So this was interesting. Um, it kind of sits in three parts for me. We have our intro, which is both our opening title, sorry, opening track and the beginning of our second track, Monuments. Sorry, Monument. It's only one of them. And it encapsulates a very simple. Man, kind of all of this is simple. That's kind of a weird way to. It's a more lower energy vibe, right? We move from that into our fast, thrashy black metal stuff for a majority of that, and then we have our 2 minute heavier element at the end of that section. So we're 8 minutes into our album, and we've really heard three variations on the same idea, which is neat on itself. I'm hoping we explore some other stuff on the album, but it's black metal. I don't think we're going to drift too far away from this. I might be surprised. And if I'm not, it's only a 47-minute album. It's one of the short. I think it is our second shortest album. Almost everybody picks something over an hour. And I think we've only had two that have been less than. We've had a 30-minute one. I don't remember who that was. And then this one at 47. I think those are the only two we've had less than an hour now. Oh, Failure was pretty short too, wasn't it? That was a good album too. Back on topic. um, all three of these sections, though, they are comprised of harmonic triads. Well, we do have dyads primarily in our opening bit, don't we? We start off with a single guitar, we add in a second guitar, and that kind of runs us through our opening track into the intro to our second track, where we begin to add more layers to it, and that's where our triads come from. And for those new to the channel here, a dyad is just two notes played simultaneously. A triad is three notes. Both are chords. It just tells you how many notes are in the chord. Um, and we pair these chords with a rhythmic element that is rigid and static. I don't think we have a percussive element in the opening track. During the thrashy section, it's alternating bass kicks and snare hits, 16th notes alternating, really quick stuff, with 16th note cymbal work, if I remember correctly. And then at the end, it was rigid quarter note ideas. Maybe half notes. Yeah, depending on how you count that out. I was feeling it at a halftime, so it would be quarter notes. But if you felt it at the original tempo that it was prior, it'd be half notes. It'd be one every other beat. Regardless, though, the idea is that it's very rigid. It's not playful. There isn't syncopation to it, which is utilizing various note lengths to create a rhythm that isn't just the same beat. Um, so rigid would be like ba 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 ba, and syncopated would be ba 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 ba, right? Lots of different lengths put together to create something a bit more. Um, I was gonna say interesting to me. I think that's the right word, but fanciful, complex might be the word for it. A lot of this rhythmic component is very rigid, though, which is it's just black metal, right? It's what I expect out of this. Um, And then in the black metal section and in our heavier third section, it's all black metal. In our thrashier section and our closing section to Monument, we have harsh vocals over top. And that is pretty much the basis for all of this. And that's why I say it's really cool that they have this underlying foundation and we explore something a bit more layered harmonically. We explore something a bit more layered sound wise. You got the harsh vocals, you got the blast beats, the bass kick, like all this noise coming from the drums. You got the tremolo picking, so we just have a lot of attacks. And then we have this weight and energy of the metal at the end without all the attacks, just the sounds themselves, kind of focusing more on the harmonic and melodic elements, the notes themselves, more so than the percussive or textural elements that we get in the thrashier section. Um, it's a really cool exploration of this. I'm not sure if the melodies are the same throughout them. It feels like the notes chosen are different in all three sections, but the underlying structure is the same. And I think it's really cool just to see the variations on the structure where they don't really change much, but we still get drastically different vibes from all three sections. Now, this is black metal, the tremolo picking, the blast beats, the growling, this is all to be expected, but they surprised me with a bass. I had mentioned in our thrashy section that we have triads, and that implies three notes. And the thing is with tremolo picking, I'm sure there is multi-string tremolo picking technique, but for the most part, when I listen to black metal, it's all single string, which means each instrument gets one note. They're not playing polyphonic lines, they're playing monophonic, which means that we need three instruments to get three notes, and we only have two guitars, which is usually what we hear in black metal, but really cool here is the bass stands out, and I love that. Black metal with bass is such a rarity, and it's always a pleasure to find. And this is so good, because it's not that the bass is um well, it kind of is playing one note at a time. It's kind of doing that pedal tone idea. I don't know if the bass was playing pedal tones here, but it's sticking with one note until you change the note, right? Typically until we change the chord. But the thing is that the guitars are doing the same thing, so I can't really discount the bass for it because it's just the whole band participating in this. Whereas usually where I get a bit upset about that is when the guitars get really cool things and then the bass just sits on one note. But everybody's doing it now, and they're doing it to create the chordal progression, right? All three instruments are needed to move at the same time, or what I would like to see in the future is all three instruments moving at different times, where we get this metamorphosis of chordal ideas rather than this chord, then this chord, then this chord, where maybe we have two beats of this chord and then the middle note changes a little bit and then the bottom note changes and then everybody changes together and then only the top note changes, getting these really nice micro movements. Not a criticism for the band. I don't expect them to do it. It's the first thing that pops into my mind when we were talking about triads here. I don't know. I think it'd be cool. I'm not holding my breath for it. Uh, Whatever. Moving on from here. Just really nice to see the bass getting a bit of love. The other thing that really stands out to me is the vocals. They don't really feel black metal to me. And I know it's because I have a very narrow idea of what black metal vocals are, and it's not entirely accurate for showcasing everything that black metal vocalists can be, but it's what I expect, and it's typically what gets delivered to me, and this is not it. Um, I almost feel like this is more of a death metal growl, which is kind of cool because it's more palatable to my ears. I could also make out, um, what are they called? Syllables, which is neat. There's a lot of enunciation going on in here, and probably some cleanliness in the production as well. That just makes the vocals feel very natural to me. I can hear what they're saying. Granted, they're in German. I don't know what he's saying, but I can hear sounds and letters and shapes and syllables, which is a lot better than most growlers, most harsh vocalists in general. But yeah, again, it's just a different type of vocal. And speaking about cleanliness of production, this is a very clear production for black metal. The guitars have their fuzz, but it doesn't overpower. The bass is not really fuzzy at all. It kind of sounds like a pretty typical metal bass, just kind of big and round, like a bass should sound, um, and filling up that center channel very well. It's just, mm, good bass sound. The drums are probably the most compressed element here. They do sound a bit fuzzy, muddy, but they're still clear. I can tell the difference between the bass and the snare. The snare has a crack to it. The bass has a thump. Nothing feels overly muted or where their defining characteristics are cut off. None of the typical aspects of, lo-fi production or high amounts of compression, um, distortion, overdrive that kind of kills any of the defining characteristics. They seem to be fairly clear with fuzz put on top, rather than the signal itself being thrown through distortion or overdrive or whatever. Which gives it the right texture, but allows them to be very clearly heard, which I think is neat. I wonder if I would like black metal more if this was done more often, where it felt like the fuzz was a separate component that was applied in tandem with instruments, rather than having the instruments signal being sent through the fuzz or being turned into fuzz. Because it still feels like black metal texturally, but it's very audible. Everything is listenable. I can hear what's going on. It's a really neat idea on the production side of it. Which, I mean, this kind of takes us very cleanly into the next thing I want to talk about. That final section, I had mentioned that the fuzz was used as its own instrument, which was very cool. Cleanliness, no. Clarity was the key element of production in those final couple of minutes. Every instrument could be clearly heard. And then out of nowhere, this fuzzy fog just kind of rolls in, and now the song just feels gnarly, but none of the instruments have changed. It's more of an atmosphere that's been added. And I like that. Well, let me say, I prefer that over what black metal typically does. I think it still gets that right texture, that right vibe, but it doesn't fuzzy everything up to where I can't hear it. When I talk about hi-fi black metal, this I think is going to be my gold standard right now, and that's because it takes a very different approach to achieving that sound, and I'm sure there are going to be some purists out there who don't enjoy it, doesn't sound black metal to their ears, and sure, that's a valid opinion, I'd say. This sounds like black metal to my ears, but it also doesn't. I'm enjoying this a lot more than usual. So if you enjoy those elements of black metal that I don't, production wise, sound wise, I can certainly see how maybe this would be too clean or too clear for you. But I think it achieves a nice middle ground of having the clarity without giving up that fuzz and distortion sound that I attribute to the genre. Now, the last thing we got to touch on before hitting the lyrics here is just vibe. What is this song telling me? Because so far, there's nothing in here that really stands out to me that, oh, we got to talk about that though. There isn't anything in here that stands out to me from black metal. The production for sure. Composition, technique, it's a lot of blast beats, a lot of tremolo picking, a lot of growling over it. It takes a lot of what black metal does well and kind of is attributed to the genre and puts their own spin on it. We get the bass, we get the clear production, we get this different type of vocal work, but it's still pretty much black metal underneath it all. So I'm actually a little worried. I'm not going to have as much to talk about as we go through this album. Already, this is rather short. I've only been talking for, what is this, 15 minutes now, I think, and I'm already getting ready to head into the lyrics and move to the next track, which is very early. Usually album reviews, we're usually a good 40 to 50 minutes in before we're starting the next group of tracks. But it's black metal. It's tremolo picking, it's dyads, it's growling over top, and it's lots of rigid drumming. And I don't have anything to add to that. I'm worried that this is going to be a very, well, short isn't a bad thing, but it is going to be a short video because I'm just not going to have a lot to talk about. I'm hoping they surprise me on that front. But so far, aside from our intro, this is just black metal. Other than our slow section, our doomier atmospheric section was interesting. We have had Death Doom on the channel before, so it's not like this is brand new to my ears. But it is interesting how they achieved that slow crawling weight while still having the fuzzy energy that black metal typically comes in. And a lot of that, again, comes from the production. Just really smart. The producer on this is it's produced and mixed by Nikita Komprad. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Yeah, just phenomenal. Recording and engineered by Jan Kesher, Kurt Kirscher, possibly. Mastered by Philip Wilsing. Just a fantastic job to the engineering team. All three of those people deserve as much credit as the band does for making this, at least opening sound of the album, so much more interesting to my ears than most black metal. Where was I going with all that? I was talking about something. I interrupted myself. Oh, what does all this mean, right? I don't know. There's just a lot of dread, weight, um, dreariness, I think was a word I used at one time for the opening. Aside, the black metal is just pure weight. The dyads, I couldn't quite get a notion on what their emotional aspect was. Like I said, they reminded me of My Chemical Romance for some reason. Not the types of chords I'm used to hearing in black metal, which tend to either be pentatonic stuff or Baroque style, classical inspirations. This was kind of punky and had some really neat half resolutions, because we had very few situations where I thought the chord progression actually resolved itself. But yeah, like I'm still trying to get a read on that. But our opening for sure, our intro track was just dreary. It's lethargic but melancholic, right? Which contrasts a bit with our ending, which was lethargic but dread, but weight, but impact. Just feeling like you have nothing to give anymore because there's so much pressure put on you, which is a very different type of lethargy than our intro, which was like almost being drained of energy, right? You don't have any weight on you, you just can't take that next step because you're so tired. Very different from having this pressure put on you and trying to lift it for each step. And then the middle, I have a tough read because it's just black metal. It's energy with a chord progression that I couldn't quite extract the emotion from. Bit of an anomaly there, but it's energetic, which stands in stark contrast to the lethargic intro and outro of Monument. So I'm really curious about that. We'll see where the rest of this takes us, though. Hit the lyrics here, and we'll move on with this. So lyrically, this is about isolation. Possibly about a little bit of despair, or at least a want for the other side. There is a single line stanza. It says, "Leave me to live eternally in the deepest sleep." It sits by itself, not against any other lines. We also have line 2 of our first stanza. It says, "Release me back into the long-awaited dream." So it almost feels like this person longs for death. They don't want life anymore. And I mean, like, black metal and nihilism, just peanut butter and jelly every time. So he says, I'm in this place, right? Oh, interestingly, calls the long-awaited dream perhaps the last freedom. that I miss so dearly in these days. It's interesting that, at least from my reading of this, death would be a freedom, which, from certain perspectives, I think I can see, but it's not something that I quite agree with. So it's difficult for me to align myself with our narrator, our character here, with the lyrics. So, despite all this, says, I wandered to the sea and to the highest mountains, looking at the world as though through a window from the outside. So, again, there's that isolationism, feeling distant and separated from the rest of the world. He says, I see how others live in multitudes, but also for themselves alone. Again, leading into this isolation. He goes, it's like me, crushed by the weight of treasures that cannot be shared. Our life is taken piece by piece. So he says, despite all this, though, I look into the cosmos, I see the stars, I see the signs, I see reality. And so, since I'm hidden over here in the mountains, I will make a monument. Doesn't necessarily say to what, but I assume it's going to be whatever the stars signified to him. Whatever this reality was, created a monument for it. And that's where the track ends. Which the weight of looking towards the cosmos and possibly the reality of that is how small of a speck we are individually, even how small we are as a planet, as a ecosystem of plants and animals and humans and all that we've been through in our 2 billion years on this earth. How it's all still so insignificant compared to everything else around us. I think it was a picture. I can't remember what the picture was. It was taken by some equipment that got sent way far out into space, and like where we were was like a little pixel on this picture that was sent back to us. Um, and we're just so small compared to the vastness of everything out there. And I wonder if that's the reality that he felt he recognized by peering into the cosmos, and in which case the heavy weight of the outro of Monument certainly leans into this, which I think this is where the lyrics would have taken place as well. Even says, crushed by the weight of treasures that cannot be shared. There's lots of elements in here of feeling separated, but still having a heavy pressure on oneself. So yeah, that's how we're starting this album. We have what, only 5 tracks to go? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, wow. Short album, both in length and track list. Like I said, I think this video is going to be over rather quickly, especially compared to some of the 3.5 and 4 hour videos we've had. But those have been for tracks with 15, or albums with 15, 16 tracks on them, or hour 20 run times. So it makes sense that this will be a bit on the shorter side. And we probably will run each song individually. No point in grouping songs up, and there's only so few ahead of us. So let's pull this back out. Flip this over to the next. Yep. Nah, I'm not pronouncing that one. And let's see what they're bringing to the table next. And see, there's that traditional sound I'm expecting. Tremolo picking, lots of drumming. Interesting. Start off with that and then kill the energy so quickly. That's kind of a more Yeah, I liked how the guitars were doing. I've been saying tremolo picking this whole time. 16th note picking though. The drums were progressively getting faster though, building up to where the guitars were at. There is some punky sort of brighter dyads and triads going on in here. Oh, I love that segmented idea there in the guitars. And yeah, so actually this is what I was talking about, where the two guitars and bass are changing notes at different rates. Yeah. Very classical. Is that a choir? No, I don't think so. I misheard. Oh, interesting, doing the vocal delay on the sides. The guitars haven't quit at all, have they? What a very full and clear drum tone. there's a bit of hopefulness in this, isn't there? So our right guitar is still doing the 16ths, but our left guitar is switched over to 8ths. So that's interesting. Something I don't know if I've expressed before is how often I notice black metal incorporating acoustic guitars. And it could just be the black metal that's thrown my way. Of course, we've heard stuff that is just pure metal for an entire track, but I do think it's interesting how frequently or how much more often black metal does this than other types of extreme metals. What is it about black metal that draws people to acoustic music? What is it about black metal that draws the guitarist to specifically Baroque? Baroque inspirations show up all over the place in black metal. It's kind of, I mean, it works. It absolutely does. Baroque metal has this, I mean, Baroque typically has a bit of a, especially the more popular songs from the Baroque period. They have a darkness to them, and I think works really well with black metal. Works well with metal in general. Metal and Baroque just, I think, will always go together. But yeah, it's just you don't hear it so often as black metal to have this really extreme portion of a track and then go to a acoustic guitar duet to end a track or to start a track. It's, I don't know. Anybody else pick this up? Maybe people know a reason for it. It just happens so often, and like for me, I'm always happy with it because for a lot of black metal, the production is too difficult for me to get past. And so it gives me a moment to appreciate the composition. And black metal typically does have some really cool composition, especially since it's hyper focused on dyads and triads. We get to hear some really cool progressions of note intervals or chord progressions. I mean, we can call them that. And I don't always get to hear them through the production. So it's nice to duck down into these, but it never really dawned on me how often it actually happens. Until now, I'm like, yeah, man, another one. So this was more or less what I expect. Lots of 16th note playing in the guitars, lots of 16th note playing in the drums, lots of growling over top of it, and some really neat chordal movements as we explore the guitars doing their thing. I really appreciate this band's almost adherence to ensuring that their guitars are not just playing harmonized licks that are identical. That the riffs are different. They are harmonious, but not the same exact thing. And we kind of touched on it a little bit in the last track, but a lot of that was mostly them playing the same things in octaves apart or fifths apart or whatever. But here we got to hear a lot of this more individualized movement. Like I had talked about in the previous analysis section, I wanted to hear these guys take their guitars and just move them at different times. And they did that here, where the notes shifted not simultaneously, but in progression. There's another S word for that. It's not simultaneous, it's in succession. That's not the word I want, but anyways, you get it. One guitar changes, and then another guitar changes, and the bass changes. Then maybe they all change together, and then one guitar changes, and maybe both the bass and the other guitar change. And so instead of just having these rigid, this bar is this chord, this bar is this chord, we have this almost fluid movement of chordal ideas. And granted, they're still not fluid. At best, we're changing every 2 beats. So instead of having a 4-bar chord, we have 2-bar chords, right? It's still rigid in a sense, but it feels more fluid because not everybody is in the same rigidity, which is very cool. Um, it's also very Baroque, but at the same time, we're not exploring note intervals that feel Baroque. We're not exploring note intervals that feel metal. A lot of this still kind of feels punky to me, and the reason I think that is we are exploring a lot of brightness. Is anybody else getting that? Like I have the lyrics in front of me, and I don't really, I haven't looked at all of them, right? So I don't have an overview, but there's lots of elements in here that are once again kind of pointing towards this nihilistic, dark concept, much like we just explored on track 2. But the music doesn't really feel like that, especially when our right guitar comes in. They'll either play a lower note than our left guitar and create intervals that feel a bit darker, or they jump up an octave or maybe an octave and a half and play lines that feel brighter. In fact, I pointed that out one time specifically. I was like, there's optimism in here. It's coming from one specific guitar over here on the right, but it is hopeful in a sense. There's positivity to this track, and it feels interesting because it's stuck within this overall weight, this pressure pushing down with all these attacks going on around it and the harshness of the vocals. But the more I started to think about it, this element of this brighter melody also showed up in our second track. In specific parts, of course, not like it was there the entire time. And I'm really interested in what this is going to signify, what the point of the divide is, unless, of course, we're going to be juxtaposing these ideas to bring them out even stronger. The nihilism brings joy to this person kind of concept. Rather than making music that fits the nihilism, we fit the emotional aspects of our character expressing these philosophical concepts. I don't know, but it was really interesting to hear and hear more of this brighter pop punks kind of stuff. It's just not the intervals I typically associate with black metal, and I think that's very cool. Now, I wrote down a couple of notes that aren't specifically about this song, but are kind of about black metal in general. Some things I've picked up that I think are very neat. So, like I had mentioned, black metal has a lot of the same foundation. You hit your drums a lot, you strum your guitar a lot, and someone screams over that, and you got black metal, right? And that's why I've always kind of said it's a production thing. The blackened part really gives us more of the genre than the composition does, which takes parts from some other stuff like thrash and some extreme metals. Um, but this other stuff kind of dawned on me while I was listening to this. There's a lot of drum variety in this track. Right from the start, we have whole notes to half notes to quarter notes to eighth notes to 16th notes with this quick speeding up until they're in line with the speed of the guitars around them. We also had a halftime section. We had a section that was more of a straight rock drum pattern that was focused on quarter notes. There was another one, a tom heavy section. We had the section where we had the grouping of like 8 bass kicks in a row, followed by like snare, cymbal, that kind of idea right there. And there was just like a lot of drumming variety. I was like, this is interesting. Black metal I kind of associate with just constant 16th notes, and there's a lot of diversity going on in here. And then I started to think about cymbal work, and of course anytime I think of black metal and cymbal work, I think of that band that I can't think of right now. Umgwa, Exercises of Futility. I still, as much as I was not a big fan of that album, I'm not a big fan of black metal in general, I still go and listen to that live drum cam of exercise number 5, from like minute 1.5 to like 3, just because the drum work is phenomenal. Um, it's primarily a lot of the cymbal stuff. And I started to listen to the cymbals here, and I'm like, oh, there's a variety here as well. And it kind of dawned on me that if your snare and bass are stuck on one idea, your black metal, you have to play fast, right? You're either doing blast beats or you're doing the alternating. You still got to get 16th notes out of those. How do you differentiate yourself as a drummer? It's the cymbal work. It really is. It doesn't surprise me thinking back on past black metal reactions when I bring up the cymbals. It's really the only point of expression that a lot of drummers have, unless they're going to deviate from the stereotypical drum patterns. And we do see a little bit of those deviations here, but when they're in that typical 16th note, sonic assault mode, the cymbals are where it's at. And I'm not going to say that the cymbal work here is mind-boggling or exceptionally fascinating, but it is just a little bit different than what I've heard from other people. This drummer tends to separate himself pattern-wise. Doesn't always stick with the 16th note assault, but there is some really cool cymbal work going on, and like that was a cool little realization there. If 2 of your 4 limbs are doing the same thing that everybody else does, and if you don't do it, you're not playing your genre, how do you differentiate yourself? Well, the other 2 feet, your cymbal feet. Well, actually, no, if you got the double bass kicks going too, you only got 1 other limb then. So yeah, you have 1 limb to differentiate yourself if you're using double bass kicks. Um, yeah, cymbals I think are how black metal drummers differentiate themselves, and I think it's cool. You always hear something unique coming out of that. The other thing I was thinking about was, if that's how drummers are identified, how do you showcase your guitar skill if everybody plays 16th notes or tremolo picking, just, really fast picking? And it's going to be note intervals. And that's this whole thing, right? That there's kind of this poppy kind of sound coming out of a lot of our chords here. Not something I typically associate. This band, despite doing what every other black metal guitarist does, just fast picking, is setting themselves apart. When I think of this band, I'm not going to think of, uh, what most other black metal bands are doing with the pentatonics and the broke. That's what everybody works with, and this is just very different. So again, not anything particular to the song, but some ideas about black metal that are popping in my head, which I think is kind of going to be the meat of a lot of this video, since we only have 4 tracks left, and I think we're just going to keep with this idea. I don't think they're going to change much. So I don't know how many new things I'll have to talk about across this video. So I'm going to hit the lyrics here, see what's going on with them, and we'll continue on. Okay, this explains the brightness in this track. Like I had mentioned, on a cursory glance, there's some darkness in the lyrics, but actually reading through them, it's a bit more of a positive take. It speaks about how time has ravaged him, that it's more difficult to breathe. There's a pressure on the chest now that exhausts the lungs. It says, I need rest, but where is the time, which was once my greatest fortune? I used to have all the time in the world, and now it feels like the last grains of sand are, approaching the the midpoint of the hourglass. Man, that metaphor would have worked so much better if I could get it out of my dang mouth. I'm almost out of sand in the hourglass. It was something I used to have so much of. He says, I raise my hands for protection, but they mutate into claws and turn against me. So, it's a deception of the self. Time has rendered your body sort of alien to you. He says, so find my core, rip off my skin, and all that's left is the remnants of life that are smoldering embers. And he says, and me being just this core aspect of myself, nothing else, I will go into the coldest winter night in search for light. He says, when my light is taken, I'll take my leave, right? So when it's my time to go, okay, I'm ready for it, right? When death is ready to have me, there won't be any fighting. But that time is not now. He says, I won't walk in this strange darkness, so naked and revealing that everything overshadows me. He says, before I had the burden of responsibility, so before I aged, right, I had a light within me and I was safe in that light, which could be innocence, could be a lot of things, but just the general idea of light versus darkness, I think, is the important part here. Interesting, he says, I return and sow a spark of warm freedom. Second time freedom has been said in 2 songs. Into a cold and dying star. The second time stars have been brought up. It says, I see to the edge of darkness a storm of lights blowing towards me. Take me, feed me, don't wait. So, with all of this darkness coming in, right, ready to, well, take me to death is the one that's alluded to, but the darkness could represent any sort of negativity. Specifically says, I'm reaching out for the light. That is my journey. I will take the most barest of my components and find the light if I have to. There is a desperation, but also an endurance to this that is interesting in that it pushes against a lot of the nihilism that black metal usually has as its lyrical core. Which is also very cool because it pushes against where I thought we were going given our opening idea, our opening lyrical concepts in track 2. And yeah, the song is a bit overwhelming, but the lyrical themes are overwhelming as well. How can you simultaneously be ready for death but not want it to happen? That there's still stuff you have left to do, but you will welcome it when it gets here. And erasing everything that feels foreign to you that never did before, watching how time changes your body and not recognizing who you are in the mirror and trying to shed that until you find the most basic form of yourself that feels natural. But when you do that, you also find the most naked form of yourself, the one most susceptible to the darkness. There's a lot of really cool ideas going on in here. And it does, well, I already said this, it fits with the music. We have the weight of all the attacks going on, but we also have that brightness that's kind of showcased through the guitar work that I wasn't really expecting here in either way. I wasn't expecting the brightness in the music nor the brightness in the lyrics. So double unexpectedness going on. Now both of these tracks have been translated like I usually do. I take a translation from DeepL and one from Google Translate, and I just kind of pick the lines that I think works best until I end up with something that kind of flows well while keeping some of the more flowery elements while still being readable. I want to lose as little in translation as possible, but I still want it to be something that makes sense to me, an English reader. Interestingly, though, our next track, track 4, is supposedly in English. That's going to be interesting. Um, but let's dive into it, I suppose. We'll pull up our next track. There we go. That was weird. This one is called Immortal. Hey, even the title was in English. Let's, what are we going to do? Oh, we're going to dive into it. Let's see what they're bringing next. Dang, I've been muted this whole time. It's 16 beats long, so it's still 4/4, but it's grouped into a 7 and a 9. So we have the tension of the hiccup right there, and then that extended moment where it feels like we should be moving on but aren't because we're expecting another 7. Yes, I love the little flourish there on a weights. There's a little, there's a reverb, but there's also a harmony off to the right, very quiet, and there's something on the left that's doing a textural pairing where I think it's the same note, but just on a different instrument than the vocals. That guitar coming in on the left with just like 2 notes. The tension of this just on the rhythmic element, it exaggerates the tension that we're getting in the music so well. They can certainly pull in the weight and darkness when they want to. Although we have shifted to something a bit more comforting with this section. Oh no! I knew it too. I was thinking, I was like, man, this is cutting it close. It's going to move right into the next track, but I can't not stop it there. This is a drastic departure, which actually it's not. Think about this for a second. Did we just listen to a black metal ballad? If we look at the concept of a ballad, they tend to be more resonant on chords than faster upbeat jigs, and they tend to cut the BPMs in half. A fast ballad is still slower than a slow faster track. Um, and they tend to incorporate a heavier focus on lead instruments, which we did on every occasion, didn't we? We cut all of our 16th notes into eighth notes, effectively cutting our tempo in half. That gave us a larger emphasis on the notes themselves rather than the texture of the attacks. We shifted from harsh vocals to clean vocals to put a better emphasis on the harmonic and melodic components of our lead instrument. And there was a larger emphasis on the overall emotion of the song than the other tracks, which focused on. Well, we did have that big bombastic moment at the end of Monument, but a lot of the track prior to this and what most black metal focuses on is texture, not chords. The chords, to my ears, are always secondary. So we have a song that gets rid of the black metal production. Everything is clean, everything is clear, um, and focuses on emotion at half speed. That's a black metal ballad. I never thought I'd use that phrase in my life, but here we are. Whatever today is, I don't know the date. Listening to a black metal ballad. Maybe there's some other criteria about topic. Do ballads have to be sappy? They just have to be negative, right? I think this was. Actually, the music had very, very little joy in it. Contrasted heavily from our last one. This one primarily focused on weight and darkness, um, with a little bit of some sort of reprieve at the end. It's not a lot, though. So, yeah, was this a ballad? I don't know. Maybe it was. Um, do I bring this up? I think this is gonna upset some people. The payoff here was not good for me. I'm sure some people really love the chorus, going back to the heavier metal with the screams and all that, to me, it missed something. It wasn't big enough. It didn't have the impact I wanted for what it was attempting to accomplish, and I think that's just because of the metal. And I feel like this is the second week in a row of doing these albums where I'm like, or have the opinion that the metal ruined a moment of cleaner orchestration. Third album in a row? I don't know, maybe. Um, it never hit for me. The second time hit a little bit better, and I think that's had something to do with the build-up. They changed up the build-up into it just a hair, and I think the impact of the first hit of the chorus landed a little bit better. But overall, it felt underwhelming both times, and that's I think it would have been fine if they had taken the vocals and pushed them up an octave. I don't know if the dude has the range for that though, right? So that's a thing I got to take into consideration. I don't know his vocal ranges. He has a gorgeous, gorgeous voice in the range he sung at here, and had a lot of control over it. We had some really nice flourishes in there as well, but maybe he doesn't practice in a higher range. Maybe he can't hit a higher range. Maybe he doesn't have that control in a higher range. Maybe they just didn't like it. I don't know what goes into it. I wasn't there when they crafted the track, but I do think that a clean pushed up an octave over where the verse is at, with a little bit more width, would have had a lot more impact than just going overdrive with growling. Something was still missing. Still a bit too anemic for my ears. So so far, I think though that's pretty much my only complaint on the album. That's not bad for being halfway through the album of a black metal band, right? This is obviously not typical black metal, but this is still some of the most praise I've given a band related to black metal in a long time. And I kind of there's a couple of moments I would not mind listening to again. Very similar to how I go back and listen to the drums on Exercise 5 from Exercises in Futility. Just the drum work there is worth watching despite the music around it. And I say despite, not like the music's bad, it's just not my cup of tea, right? Not throwing shade here, just it's not my preference. Um, but yeah, the big payoff just it never landed for me, and I think it would have been fine without landing so far into the more extreme aspects of the band. Now, I touched on our opening the first time I was muted. Sadly, just I don't know how that happened. I'm usually pretty good about paying attention when I mute myself, making sure I unmute myself, and checking the volume to make sure that I'm not muted when I'm talking. But it did not happen this time. What I was saying, a lot of this song is well, the whole song is in 4/4, but a lot of it exists in this asymmetric element to it, where we have a, technically speaking, if you want to look at it this way, a 7 beat bar and a 9 beat bar. So instead of analyzing it as 4 bars of 4/4, you can analyze it as a bar of 7/4 and a bar of 9/4, or 4/4 3/4 5/4 5 sorry 4/4 3/4 4/4 5/4. However you want to look at it. You can also look at it as 4 bars of 4, where the next phrase starts on beat 4 of bar 2. However you want to look at it, it's asymmetric, and we get that hiccup at beat 7 going into beat 8, because 8 is our new downbeat, where we're expecting that downbeat to be on 9. So it feels like we lurch into the next section too early, and like, okay, our brains immediately set that as the standard then. Okay, we thought we were doing 8 beats, we only did 7, so we'll obviously do 7 again. And then 7 comes along and we're still not moving. And then, oh, okay, we're just going to do 8 because that's normal. And we're still not moving. And then at 9, we're still not moving. And it's just like, it's that intensification, that intense anticipation of when are we going there? When are we moving on? Why is this lingering? Why can't the song go forward? And if we just extend the bar out, we are going to get that element as well. But because we cut the first section short, it only exacerbates it, which is just, yeah. If you want to build tension, that is a way to do it. It's so good. And it's so simple, right? We haven't changed anything. We're still doing a 4-bar phrase in 4/4. You can't get any more basic than that. And you just utilize those expectations and you warp them around until they're a weapon against your listener to control how they feel about it. And it's one simple twist. Take one beat from the first set and give it to the second set, and now you've got something that creates so much anticipation and tension in the listener. It's such an effective way of going about doing that. And then the music going on around it, the vocals, right? This is the first time we've heard clean vocals too, and they're really low and they're haunting. There's a lot of width to them. He's definitely singing from the back of the throat, very open sound. It's just it should be a powerful sound, right? This is what, if you ever listen to a lower range male choir vocalist and they have that big booming sound, that's typically what I associate with this timbre of having this backward placed wide sound. But we don't get that. And I think that's what makes it a little bit more haunting for me. Instead, we get something kind of weak. It's in control for sure. There's little flourishes throughout that I've pointed out. I really love them. But it's also a little unsure, maybe uneasy. It feels like it should be a powerful sound, but it isn't. And that's unnerving. And when you pair that with the phrasing that feels unreliable, you get something that is just very nerve wracking. No, you get something that makes you very nervous. Similar ideas, very different concepts. Um, and just on edge. Everything here seems like it should be something else. Nothing is as I expect it to be, and that puts me on edge, makes me tense, and it doesn't really let up. That phrasing persists until the end of the track. There's always that underlying element of something's not right. Even when we hit our heavier moments, we don't release that rhythmic phrasing. On top of that, we've also shifted the overall sonic quality of the track. Like I mentioned, we cut all of our rhythmic stuff in half. Instead of playing 16th notes, we're playing 8th notes. And so while it's still rigid, if you listen to the drums, you listen to the bass, you listen to the guitars, they're all just staying on the beat. Nothing changes. Always emphasizing one bit. It's a very rigid style. It fits black metal. Right? Rigidity is just what the genre is about. We've already talked about this in this video. But it feels heavier. It is a slow rigidity rather than the fast, chaotic rigidity that we've seen throughout the rest of the album. And through that, it really, at least to me, increases the intensity of the pressure, which you would think that playing faster would make it feel more intense. But I think up to a certain point, especially at 16 minutes into this album, you kind of acclimated to that sound. If you want to increase the weight, you either have to play faster or you have to play with a heavier tone. And they achieved the second because playing 30-second notes at this is just going to be bonkers. They achieve this through tone and speed. They make it slower, they make the sounds bigger, it makes everything feel larger and heavier. This is no longer the guitar work of a Pixie on Sprite. No, not Sprite, that's caffeine free. A Pixie on Mountain Dew fluttering around with this intense speed and agility. This is a lumbering giant. There is so much pressure to the big moments here that is amplified by the unease that we get from our verse. It really all works very well together, and I do wish maybe it is just a sound sphere thing where the sound sphere is not filled up enough for me, because the chorus does work well with the verse. They play off of each other well. It still was missing some factor. And usually when it's some factor, I can't put my nose on, can't put my finger on. It's usually a production thing. So maybe it does work the way it is. It just didn't have enough oomph for me. So we have tension and unease, and then weight, and then tension and unease, and then weight, and then more weight with a little bit of hopefulness twisted in there. We eventually get some guitar work that has some positive vibes to it. I don't know what to make of that. I really don't. For a song that is as heavy as this for as long as it is, I was not expecting that twist at the end. And I think that kind of wraps up my feelings here. This is easily going to be my favorite track on the album, though. The atmosphere they build, the clean vocal work, just it's all about the nuance. You change one tiny thing for a massive effect. This is one of the most efficient compositions I've heard in a very long time. Um, as far as making small changes to get just massive effects on the listener out of it. So many small things, especially how it works within the context of the album. On its own, I really don't think it's going to be that interesting, but like I had mentioned, given that we've listened to very similar music up until this point, it really stands in contrast due to that and is exaggerated through its contrast, which, this is the message I've been delivering since the beginning of this channel, is that contrast is the key to keeping elements heightened. And this is just such an effective use of this. It is so good. All right, hitting the lyrics. Now, I'm curious what the lyricist has said about this, because the whole album is about light versus darkness. On the surface level, it's a pretty easy read, but I'm curious what they're supposed to be allegory or metaphors for, specifically to the lyricist. Because the nice thing about working with something so vague as this is that anybody can bring themselves into it and introduce a new reading. But I'm really curious what the lyricist was aiming for themselves, what their personal read of their own lyrics are. We left off, and the usual disclaimer, I know this probably isn't a concept album. I'm going to read everything as related in some sense. We left off track 3 with somebody who did not want to go to the darkness and was ready to break themselves down to their most basic core in order to still have a functioning element to reach out for light. Here, we have somebody who, as much as they want, could not escape the darkness. We open the track, it says the fading rays of eternal light, longing for some skin to kiss, an empty ocean deep awaits, a nocturnal flood of gloom and grief. So, our narrator, our lyricist, our vocalist, our character, whatever, the light is fading. And the light, which is interesting, it's called an eternal light, but it fades. I love that imagery. What is something that is eternal but also can diminish? Well, it could just be that the light's still there, but it's just being blocked. Anyways, it sounded cooler in my mind. Maybe it's just pretty straightforward. And he's stuck in this ocean. He calls it a nocturnal flood of gloom and grief. Nocturnal is night, once again bringing in the concept of darkness. Through this darkness, we experience a loss of time. Says it feels like 100 years have gone and another 1,000 to come. Refuse to live, refuse to die, looking for the hand that feeds, carving my flesh so deep until every scar of life is drenched in blood. There's an adherence to memory here. Time seems to cease, and so he will ensure that no matter what, he will remember his past life. Carves his ideas into his body. He calls them the scars of life. Says he looks up, though. The sky is lit by fire, and there's an endless dark below that pulls him down and tears him asunder, two worlds colliding and bursting apart. So, if we go back to the idea that he was stuck in his darkness for 1,000 years, or 100 years and had 1,000 ahead of him, this could almost be seen as a sort of purgatory. And I think this leans into that more. There is this darkness below that wishes to tear him apart, and there is a sky above, and he feels trapped between them. It says two worlds colliding. He says, lights are flooding my flesh so deep until every scar of life will be cleansed. He asks, cleanse me. So, the first two sets of lyrics, tracks 2 and 3, I kind of read in more of a metaphorical way. This one I find a little bit more difficult to do so. I'm curious, again, where the lyricist stands on the meaning, their meaning behind the lyrics. But I think we continue on pretty straightforwardly with this battle of light and dark over our narrator's character. Whether that is a singular character existing through all these tracks or a series of narrators in vignettes, they all seem to be about the battles of light and dark and not wanting to give into the dark, which again is a very cool theme for black metal, since we've listened to a lot of more nihilistic ones in the past. Alright, moving on. We're going to go to the next track. We got 3 more ahead of us. This one's called Morgen. I think this is the longest. Oh no, this is one of the shortest actually. And then the next one's going to be the longest at like 11 minutes or something. Alright, let's hit it and see what's going on. Oh, I forgot the tracks ran into each other. Those blast beats, man. Jeez. Yeah, there's a reluctant defiance, a strive to break out of where we were. There's darkness in here, for sure, but it's kind of bright. This whole album has been darkness and brightness in the music. Light and dark battling for prominence. The bass just chugging away underneath this. Interesting. So we had a little bit of positivity in that. We have a little bit in this, but it was overridden with that. Yeah, that one right there, that really dark chord. Yeah, rather straightforward black metal track. We did have a couple of sections, mostly at the beginning, and then one in the middle. So I guess two sections where we bring it down to just a single acoustic guitar. We didn't stick with them very long. It was as if whatever brightness and joy they were bringing to the track was immediately overshadowed by the weight and heaviness. We only ever saw them for a couple bars at most. Everything else was blast beats, 16th note picking, just constant. The growls, this was probably one of their most intense tracks and stands in stark opposition to their ballad, Immortal, as being more of a stereotypical sound for the genre rather than subverting it almost and deconstructing it. So I don't really have much to say about this track in particular, but I do want to point out something interesting I picked up. I kind of alluded to it there. I wanted to hold it in and just say it all at the end, but like I had to blurt it out. It was like this crazy revealing revelation I had. Revealing revelation. Got away with words, bro. This whole album has been a fight between darker chords taking a spotlight and brighter, more optimistic ones. And I've said many times throughout here that I don't really know what the emotional resonance of so many of these sections are. And I think that's it right there. They are sort of complex in that they are both dark and weighty and heavy, but also bright and joyous and triumphant. And when they come together, when you put these chords back to back to back to back, eight chords, you string eight chords together in this fashion where some are brighter, some are darker, some are more neutral, some are overwhelming, and some are triumphant. And it's just really hard to get a read off of that. It lacks identity. But what if it's not about evoking a specific emotion? What if it's about showcasing this battle? Every track so far has been about a person stuck between a darkness and a light. Whether it is the will to live versus being on your deathbed, or it's about um, feeling isolated in the world and then realizing how small and insignificant you are entirely, and that your problems really aren't that big of a deal in the larger scheme of the world. That kind of sounds like a darkness versus a darkness, but some people might find reassurance in that. Uh, it could be trapped in a purgatory between a literal light and darkness, a redemption and an eternal suffering. It is about the battle of brightness and joy versus darkness and weight for these people. And the music perfectly reflects that every time. It isn't about evoking a specific emotion, it's about showcasing this battle. All the songs shift between neutral sounds, bright sounds, dark sounds, heavy sounds, lighter sounds, all the time in such rapid succession that it's not about crafting an overall sound, but just about showing this battle. And that's pretty cool. We got 3 tracks ahead of us, I think. 2 tracks ahead of us? Only 2. Dang, this is going fast. We're only 100 minutes in. We're almost done. Um, but yeah, that was like this huge revelation. Like that's what's been going on. That's why I can't always get a read on it. When the sections are supposed to be heavy, I get a read on that. When they're supposed to be bright and hopeful, I get a read on that. But when they're not specifically one of those sections, it's really difficult for me to figure out what's going on. And that's because, well, I mean, if you imagine a war, especially like an older war, pre pre-ranged weaponry, swords and shields stuff. It's kind of chaotic. You don't really know what's going on. It's hard to get a read on the battlefield when you're in the middle of it because there's just lots of things going on everywhere. And that's kind of what it felt like. So many things going on. How am I supposed to get a read on this? Well, you're not supposed to. It's musical storytelling, not atmosphere building. Yeah, I like that. I think that's it for this one. I don't think I have any. I didn't write any notes down for it. And it's a lot more of the same stuff I typically. Yeah, let's hit the lyrics. So this one I'm a bit lost on. It seems to buck some of the trends we've seen throughout the album. There is still a battle of darkness and light. We kick off the song, says completely hidden under dripping shadows, keeping the light at a distance from the moment. So we still have this struggle between lightness and dark. But this seems to be about somebody who has lost the will to live. He says, My wish is not waking up in the morning. What if the will to live flees? The echoes of the voice fade away, the stars go out. Who brings us light? Later on, I'm skipping a few stanzas here, says, as the firmaments crumble, you turn away from the stars, fallen, broken, failed. Do you stay hidden, delivered from the eternal night? So we have these ideas. We have this external person speaking to somebody and says, maybe even speaking to us, says, if you don't want to live anymore, could we fix that? Could we reinstate your will to live? Could we make you want to find the light again? Do you want to be delivered from darkness? That part makes perfect sense to me. The answer doesn't. We have a repeated line that says, desire for the bitter truth, always she brings us light. I don't know what the bitter truth is, unless we're talking about the truth that we looked at in track 2, which is how small we are in the universe, in the infinite cosmos. There is one other stanza, says one word, and you'll believe everything I say. Even if it's all just a game, or all just a dream. Forget me not. We never hear the one word, though. At least I don't think so. I've literally just said to you all of the lines of the song in out of order to better support my reading of it. But the general vibe is that this person can help reinstate the will to live. They can help walk people away from suicide, to help walk people away from inviting death into their lives, and to step back into the light. All we need to desire is the bitter truth, and she will bring the light to us. I'm a bit lost here. Who is the she? What is the bitter truth? What is the one word that we need to hear to believe everything? I don't know. But on the surface, it does continue a lot of the themes we've been experiencing, or we've been talking about, and continues along with a lot of the trends musically that we've heard throughout the album. So, let's keep this train rolling. We are going to move on to the penultimate track, called That. This is the longest on the album. Like I said, I think it's about 11 minutes. And then we'll have a short outro, about 6 minutes long. So, let's dive into this and see how they're going to continue the album. We're going to continue with a very big fade in. Yep, so 2 chords. Oh, yeah, the repeat is nice. The delay. But we have 2 chords. The only difference between them, at least in our melody, is a shifting down of our root tone. Yeah, this is gorgeous. Bass coming in real strong. Yeah, really nice roll there. Ooh. Yeah, so the last section actually had some really neat rhythmic ideas to it, utilizing dotted notes. Not a lot of syncopation, but something. And now we're back to a rigid vibe. Overwhelming. The guitars are starting to get drowned out. Oh, really fun cymbal work too. Okay, I was wondering where they're going to take that. If they were going to bring it back down and build again. Nice little fake out there. like the marching snare ideas. Kind of a neutral kind of dread. Yeah, we're getting two slow burns in the same track. Ooh. Oh, those delayed accents on that cymbal. As usual, I just want to take this and put some strings behind it. I don't know what it is, black metal, man. I always want to put strings behind it. This just keeps getting heavier though. What? What a weird decision. I mean, not that it was bad. I think my problem with it is we haven't heard the organ at all. So it comes out of nowhere. It's not something that's been foreshadowed. It's not something that we've had time to acclimate to. It's not even something we heard back in like track one. Like it's not been on the album at all. And it's done to play the final chord in a resolution that the guitars have been working on. And that is it. Like the guitars just stop and we have this really harsh shift towards this new timbre that's playing what the guitars should have played. And that makes it kind of strange. If the organ had been presented at all, it would have felt a lot more natural. If the organ had been faded into underneath the guitar line, and that was the point where they were the most fullest as far as volume, right? Maybe they're doing a really slow fade in, 0 to 100, they hit 100% volume at that beat. And at that beat, the guitars are completely gone. The guitars don't fade out. It's not a crossfade. You just kind of fade the guitars and under the guitars. Or sorry, you fade the organ in under the guitars So when you rip the guitars out and do just the organ, it feels a little more natural. Just something. It feels so out of place. And again, maybe when we hit the lyrics, that'll make sense. But it's just, it really, I legitimately laughed at it. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. We've never heard this sound before, and it was used for a single note to end a pretty big moment. I think if they had given that to the guitars and allowed the guitars to naturally fade out, I don't think it would have been that. I mean, that's what would have been expected, but I don't think it would have been less impactful because it wasn't the organ. I'm really hoping the organ has a lyrical purpose because musically it feels it's just so out of place. I I I don't even know. The rest of this track though. So we got a black metal slow burn with a bit of a doom influence, which we've seen before. In fact, our second track, our first real track, had a doomy outro on that. So yeah, the black and doom thing kind of works well for this band. Um, we have this really beautiful slow burn, and I loved it. It's based off of a lot of little ideas, right? We come in and we have our 2 bar phrase in our guitar line, um, and then we end up. It does 2 bars of playing and then 2 bars of silence or something like maybe it's a bar of playing and a bar of silence. Anyways, we end up looping this upon itself so that during the bar of silence we actually get a repetition of it, and so we've built this upon itself so we have this constant flowing idea, and we put this other guitar idea over it, and that's a shorter idea. I think that was 1 or 2 bars, and it gets looped ad nauseum. Then we bring in the drums and they have a pretty simple short idea and it gets looped, and we just keep adding all these sections, and it's a really gorgeous section. It really is. It's a beautiful moment of the album, and you can really get lost in it. And so when the black metal part comes in, it sort of shocks you awake. Um, and again, not saying this has anything to do with the last track, but the last track we've left off with a bit of a hopefulness. You know, you might want to go towards the darkness, but I could help you return to the light if you'd like. And so we begin this track with brightness. It has a tinge of darkness to it, but it's a very beautiful section that doesn't utilize a lot of heavy doses of darkness to achieve that beauty. And as soon as we get out of it, we have this harsh transition into this weight, into this heaviness, into just this full-on black metal sound. And it's like getting hit with that wave of darkness. You thought you might have were finding your way back to the light, and you're not. We exist in this for quite some time. We have a little fake out, which I thought was beautifully executed. The left guitar cuts out entirely. Our right guitar is hanging on to a note, and it's slowly diminishing in volume. And the drums cut out, so we kind of have this pocket where like the sound is kind of like scooping into this like zero-ness, and then we burst back out of that, going back into the metal. Because honestly, my mind was like, okay, we're gonna dip back down to our single guitar. Maybe we'll start with 2 guitars, and then we're gonna build up again and get back there. But we didn't. We had what seemed like an escape, but the darkness overwhelming. Again, very cool. And then we do this for a little bit, and then we do another slow burn. And this slow burn takes up the rest of the track. And it houses a lot more darkness in it than our previous slow burn. It starts off a little bit brighter, more conflicted, I should say. And it doesn't take long before we end up in full on dark, heavy mode. And it is a gorgeous moment. Really going for that dark beauty there. And it finds a way to make it palatable but also weighty. with the type of pressure and impending doom to it that I don't know, it perfectly balances all of it. And I enjoyed it up until that rogue organ chord that comes out of nowhere. Not to say that wasn't enjoyable, it just really caught me off guard. So this is the longest. This is something I noticed. This is the longest track. One of our other longest tracks was Immortal, I think. All these bars are kind of the same length. No, it was track 3. I think that was our second longest track on here. It was another one, though, that utilized these extended periods of slow burn. And so we end up with a track that is long, but ends up doing a lot of repetition and moves less often than our shorter tracks, which creates this interesting concept where the shorter tracks feel shorter because we're constantly moving between ideas, and our longer tracks feel longer because there's not as much going on in them. Like this was 11 minutes long, but I swear it felt like 15, 16. It was ridiculously long. And other times, I'll be listening to the song and I'll be like, oh, we must be up to the midpoint, and then I'll check and I'm like, oh, gee, we're almost done. Like I got to get ready to pause this. um, and so the album as a whole tends to squash and stretch in interesting ways where it feels like certain elements just stick around forever. And I think it's interesting. Which track was it that was talking about time? Track 4. Oh, yeah, that one. Yeah, that one didn't feel long. I thought it would have been pretty cool if the track that was talking about feeling like being 100 years have gone and 1,000 are left to go was one of the longer ones. But I think that one went by pretty fast. That was Immortal. That was a good track. Oh, that was the ballad. Yeah, that was a good track. Interestingly, because on YouTube you can see where people listen to the most, and pretty much all these tracks, the majority of people start it and end it. Those are the points where people listen to most on all of these, except this track in particular. It has a much higher listen aspect to it. It's still a downward slope. People start it and don't finish it. How do you do that with music? But there is a peak in the middle, which is very different from everything else. There is a part of this song that people continue to come back to, and it looks like it might even be the peak of the whole video, the entire album. This is the part that the most people come back to listen to, which is very interesting. People do duck out during the two slow birds, though. At least that's what it looks like. Interesting. Um, yeah, I don't have any notes on this one. Just more black metal with the slow burn, which I thought was really neat. I think there's something in there I wanted to talk about, but yeah, maybe it'll come back to me. Let's hit the lyrics. All right, cool. This is only 3 stanzas long, which is the shortest track lyrically, also the longest track musically. Um, it seems to be about escaping the darkness, and sitting on the edge. It says, what's this line? Oh, I break free on the edge of darkness against the light. Um, and he speaks to somebody. He says, take me, feed on my darkness. Your empire, the skies ruled by thousands of flames, radiant pillars reaching into the clouds, a stairway to heaven drowning far away in a flood of light. I think that's to showcase just how far away from the light our character is, but I'm also curious who they're speaking to. He then requests, lend me your clean robe, help me to escape from this madness, this eternal dance, on this my narrow line of life. So it could be that this whole album has been a metaphor for destructive behaviors. And he's asking for help. I'm tired of teetering on death, right? I want to be in the light. Help me get there. Interestingly, he says, when the tide seizes me and tears me from. Well, let me restate this. This is back at the part where he says he's on the edge of darkness against the light. He says, I'm on the edge of darkness when the tide seizes me and tears me from my sleep. I wake up from this real dream. All fears vanquished, but I fall. And that is the last line we hear. Interestingly, I think this was also about the part in our second slow burn where the bright elements begin to be diminished and then completely removed, filled in with the weight and the darkness and the width that we saw throughout the rest of the track, the last couple of minutes there. I don't know what to make of this, because it almost turns this, I just mentioned this might be a metaphor for destructive behaviors, right? The balancing between light and dark, teetering on death, drinking yourself close to death every night, or not being careful with controlled substances, and just always walking on that razor's edge, and any day could be the time you fall to darkness. But then this kind of pulls it into less of a metaphorical area and more of a literal area. All of that darkness and light and the battle and falling between the stuff and being out here on the mountain and making this monument, this was all part of a dream that felt very real. But now that I've woken up, the fears are gone. And yet I still fall. And so now I'm really curious about where they're going to go with this in our final track. How do you wrap this up? I honestly thought it was a vignettes of battles of darkness and light, trying to find a way to live in a more positive manner, and using metaphorical elements to showcase this in drastically bombastic ways, very theatric ways of showing these battles. But this almost makes it feel as if it was all really going on in like a mental state, a dream world, a dream state. I don't know. Let's wrap this up, right? Let's see where they take us on our final track, Haven. Oh, I think I know. At least I hope so. That title it has a meaning. Let's dive into this, finish this up. We got 6 minutes ahead of us. Is that two guitars? Or is that one guitar that's outputting both a clean and a gritty signal? Or maybe it's just a high-end EQ that's coming out clear, but the lower notes are very... Not the higher range I was talking about that I wanted in Immortal. But very cool to hear this. Ooh, bringing us some darkness on that one. Interesting, it's also very dissonant against the tone our vocals are still holding. I love those harmonics just ornamenting over there on the right. Oh no! Why? Yeah, so there's a rising tension in here that I want to attribute to fear, but it kind of gets erased with that darkness that we saw a little bit ago. Yeah. A lot of resolution in here. There's also a peace, and I think that's the most important element of it. All right. Yeah, one of the more enjoyable black metal albums that have been thrown across my man. That was just a terrible start to a metaphor that have been tossed to me that I've been forced to listen to. Um, so the ending though, not what I was expecting at all, and I think that's one of my favorite things about this album is there are a lot of moments that I do expect, but it's always paired with something I'm not. Slow burns, doom, clean vocals during a black metal ballad, and this outro, it is primarily clean guitars, bass, drums, and falsetto vocals. It does get layered up in ways that do get pretty big. They tend to fill the sound sphere by the end of it, but it's not anything I would call heavy. It's just large. It still is overwhelming in a lot of ways that black metal tends to be, but they achieve it in a different manner. And much like everything else on the album, it is hyperfixated on emotion, primarily derived from the layering up of multiple monophonic guitar lines. We end up with something that is, well, much like everything else on the album, a mix of things. Emotionally, we go through, um, well, almost comfort, complete neutrality. We do enter into this really dark, tense idea after the end of our first stanza, I think it was. The vocalist was just holding a note out, and the guitars were just getting darker and darker and more ominous, and it was only feeling more so, exaggerating the emotions they were going for through this progression because their vocalist was still giving us that moment of home where things were calm and clear. But that didn't come back the second time through. We did have a couple of moments of darkness, a darker element, but they were quickly replaced with our final vibe that we had, which I called calming and full of resolution. There's a piece in there that I thought was really important, especially given all the ideas that we've explored throughout the album, both musically and lyrically. It was nice to find some peace. I'm not sure what that piece is. We'll dig into that when we hit the lyrics, but it does seem that, at least for now, there is less existential dread in our character. Again, I don't know if this is conceptual or if it's supposed to be a series of vignettes or whatever, but a lot of the album has dealt with existential dread. What do you do when you feel separate from the rest of the world? What do you do when you feel separate from your life? What do you do when you feel emotionless, when you're torn between two worlds? Um, and trying to find meaning through all of that. Um, and for this final track to have elements of peace in the music that isn't battling a darkness, that isn't there to juxtapose the complete opposite tone, I think is a fantastic way to end this track. Um, the falsetto is an interesting choice. I don't know if it's a functional one or a thematic one, though, and I think there's only one way to find out, and we gotta ask the vocalist. Uh, because I don't really see how it brings anything to the table thematically. But if the vocalist did want to get up into a higher range but lacked it in their chest voice, it makes perfect sense to go falsetto, and it does fit. A lot of the music is very light and airy. It has a levity to it that falsetto vocals typically also bring an ethereal element. And so, on a purely timbral level, it makes sense. And that's what I mean, that it's a functional decision. They went with falsetto because it fit the music, not necessarily because it fit the story that was going on with the lyrics, anyways. Um, I do think it's interesting that the final track here kept my attention for so long. It was 6 minutes, give or take, of a fairly one note concept, but it was just, again, I'm gonna drill this in, contrast. Given all the weight that we've heard so far, this felt like it was only 2 or 3 minutes long, despite the heavy amounts of repetition that went into it, because it was so different from the last 40 minutes of music that we've been listening to. Contrast can do so much, not just elevate moments of height, but also to alter time. It's a powerful tool. See, lyrically, I'm just going to read through this. I'm not going to pause and read it on my own time because there's not a lot to it. A lot of repetition, actually. Fade away constantly. Keep your pace of the world. If you lose your track, you will cease to be in use. Fade away constantly. So it says keep your pace, right? If you slow down or if you speed up or if you just lose your position in the world, you'll cease to be in use. You'll no longer be useful to the world. It's almost as if saying that you're a cog in the machine, and if you stop doing what you're designed to do, you'll be replaced. It says, I can't quite see the aim. Can't quite feel what's right. Will I fall into the sky? Will the stars fall in my eyes? This gets repeated continuously. However, we rearrange some of it to say, will I see the aim? Will I feel what's right? Will I see the stars? Will I see what's right? So he says, I don't understand any of this, but will I? And that's how it ends. There is not much peace here. In fact, there seems to be more existential dread. Assuming this is conceptual and all these instances have been a series of events in this person's life, um, and we read track 6 a bit more literally, where everything up to that point has been a dream, and then they still fell, regardless that the light and dark battles were in their minds, unless that's to say that the light, because the light and the darkness don't come up here. So yeah, that would be a metaphor for their fears. All these tracks have been metaphors for their fears, what keeps them awake at night, their existential dread that they have knowing about things in life. Where does that bring the monument though? But waking up from all these dreams, right? Says all my fears are vanquished, but I fall. Um, and I think that's to say that while the dreams were still that they were hyper realized concepts of the actual fears they have, they still have those fears, and they weren't really answered through the dreams. And this is kind of a culmination of everything that they are as far as fearing. It's not just light versus dark, it's about knowing your place in the world. The purpose of it. What is the point of life? Will I eventually see the aim? Will I eventually see the purpose? What is the aim of this? What is the point of all this? What is my purpose? Will it all make sense? Will it all be right eventually? And the song just kind of ends there. And I think that's really interesting because it takes something rather universal and creates something bombastic out of it. And then at the end reminds the listener, yeah, we explored all these interesting concepts of light versus dark and being pulled down into abysses and being lost in, nocturnal waters. But, this is something that everybody can deal with eventually at some point in their life. And there are no answers. It's something you'll wrestle with until the end. Maybe you'll find peace in it. Maybe you won't. But no one knows the answers and no one can know the answers, and we refuse to give any sort of direction because we don't know the answers. And that's kind of the vibe I get through all this. which is both reassuring, comforting, but also dreadful. At the end of this, I'm no closer to answering these questions than I was at the beginning. Which, okay, I think I'm in good company then, but also it doesn't fix the dread. And maybe that's where some of that musical stuff comes from, where there was a bit of darkness in the music, despite the lyrics not really going in that direction. The lyrics are uneasy, sure, and questioning, a little scared, but not darkness, not malicious music. So maybe it's just once again the balance there of positivity and negativity. Seems to be the point of this entire album is trying to balance that and finding a midpoint to where you can accept it, accept both sides, accept both truths that we can't know and that we don't know. Those are my thoughts on Der Weg einer Freiheit's Noktvrn. What'd you think? Do you enjoy it? Anything that stood out to you? Anything you'd like to expand on what I said? Maybe correct me on? Put those thoughts down in the comment section. Above that's a description box. In there you'll find a link for Linktree. Takes you here. You can find ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, my music, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. All right, that wraps this up. Patrons, I'll see you in the morning, 11 a.m. Eastern. We'll do a live stream. We're gonna do the last live stream lineup from last month. We were supposed to do it last week. It is now 12 tracks, I think. It's going to be a long one. We're probably looking at 2.5 hours. And then we'll just keep going from there. The first week of March's batch will be on the second Sunday, and we'll continue on like that. And then Monday we'll come back and we'll start death metal, which we were supposed to start last week. It'll be interesting. Finally get to check out what that's all about, especially the more standard death, not prog death, not tech death, not doom death, not black death. Just see if we can find some standard death metal and figure out what that's all about. All right, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.